I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the exact smell of your mother's kitchen on a damp autumn afternoon. Perhaps it is the earthy scent of boiling potatoes, the sharp aroma of freshly peeled Brussels sprouts, or the comforting, sweet fragrance of warm custard cooling in a glass bowl. Listen closely, and you might just hear the rhythmic, heavy ticking of the pendulum clock on the wall, perfectly in sync with the gentle rattling of rain against the single-pane windows. Welcome back to the 1970s in the Netherlands. It was a very different world back then. Today, we are going to walk down memory lane together and look at 30 rules and rituals every Dutch child had to follow. Some of these might seem completely absurd to the modern world, but to us, they were just everyday life. Stay with me until the very end, because the final rule we will talk about might just bring a tear to your eye and remind you of the purest kind of love. Time seems to flow at an entirely different pace back then. It moved slower, deliberately, without the frantic rushing that defines the modern age. The living room was the undeniable center of the universe, warmed by a single gas heater that glowed bright orange in the center of the house. We did not have endless distractions in our pockets. We had each other, and we had the art of waiting. People today often think that a life without modern technology was somehow poorer or less fulfilling. But you and I know the profound truth. Our lives were infinitely richer in genuine connection. We learned patience by waiting a whole week for our favorite television show. We learned gratitude from the simplest of weekend treats. The rules our parents gave us were not meant to restrict us, but to guide us, to build a resilient character, and to teach us the value of what we had. It was a time when human voices filled the room, not the silent glowing of screens. Let us start with the kitchen table, the very heart of the Dutch morning. The first unwritten rule of the day was about the bread. You were allowed exactly one slice of cheese for your brown bread. If you wanted something sweet, like chocolate sprinkles or peanut butter, there was a very strict protocol. You had to eat a slice with savory toppings first, like cheese or cold cuts, before you were ever allowed to touch the sweet jar. And when you finally got to pour those precious chocolate sprinkles, you had to be incredibly careful. A thin, modest layer was all you were permitted. If you poured too much, a stern look from your mother across the table would quickly remind you of the cost of groceries. You would use your knife to spread the butter perfectly all the way to the edges, ensuring not a single sprinkle would fall off onto your plate. It told us to savor every single bite, and it made that sweet sandwich taste like a true reward for finishing the healthy one. And now let us recall the infamous Saturday bathing ritual. Long before every house had a luxurious modern bathroom with a steaming shower, washing was a meticulously planned weekend event. The large heavy zinc tub would be brought into the kitchen and placed on the linoleum floor near the heater. Water was boiled in kettles on the stove and carefully poured in. The rule was simple but absolute. The water was shared. Usually, the youngest children went first, while the water was still somewhat clean and hot. By the time it was the oldest child's turn, the water was lukewarm and decidedly soapy. Your mother would scrub your back with a rough washcloth and a block of simple, unperfumed soap. You would sit there, knees pulled up to your chest, feeling the draft on your wet shoulders. It was a humble ritual, but emerging from that tub, wrapped in a thick towel warmed by the heater, made you feel incredibly safe and deeply clean. When it came to playing, the outdoors was our entire kingdom. The rule for coming home was dictated not by a watch, but by the city infrastructure. You were allowed to roam the neighborhood, build secret huts in the bushes, or play marbles on the uneven brick pavements. But the golden rule was that you had to be home the exact moment the streetlights flickered on. In the late afternoon, you would keep one eye on the lamppost at the corner of your street. The moment that distinct, soft orange glow appeared against the twilight sky, a sudden panic would wash over the playground. Bicycles were grabbed hastily and you would sprint all the way home, hoping to reach the front door before your father sat down for dinner at precisely 6 o'clock. There was no calling a mobile phone to check on you. The streetlights were the ultimate, silent curfew of our childhood, and we respected them without question. Do you remember the absolute magic of the Wednesday afternoon? This brings us to another beloved rule of the era. On Wednesdays, school finished at noon. The entire afternoon stretched out before you, like an endless horizon of freedom. But there was a ritual to follow when you arrived home. You would take off your coat, hang it neatly on the peg, and sit at the table. Your mother would pour you a glass of sweet orange syrup water and hand you exactly one dry biscuit or a small piece of fruit. You would sit there and tell her about your morning. Only after this quiet moment of connection were you allowed to change into your older play clothes and run outside. It was a beautiful transition from the discipline of the school desk to the wild freedom of the neighborhood. That glass of bright orange syrup tasted like the essence of childhood liberty, a small celebration in the middle of a long school week. Television in the evening had its own set of unbending laws. We only had 2 channels, and children's programming was a rare, scheduled luxury. For many of us, the ultimate rule of bedtime was governed by a wise puppet owl on the television screen. Every evening, just before the news, we would watch the animal news program. We would sit cross-legged on the rug, mesmerized by the charming voices and the simple morality tales from the animal forest. The absolute rule was this: as soon as the wise owl closed his eyes and wished everyone a good night, the television was switched off, and you had to walk directly up the stairs to your bedroom. There was no negotiating for 5 more minutes. The owl had spoken, and his word was the law of the land. It was a gentle, comforting way to end the day, transitioning us peacefully into the quiet of the night. Speaking of bedrooms, sleeping through a Dutch winter in the 1970s required real bravery. Central heating rarely extended to the bedrooms on the upper floors. The rule was that you had to get undressed and into your pajamas as quickly as humanly possible to avoid freezing. In the depths of winter, you would often wake up to find beautiful intricate ice ferns frozen onto the inside of your bedroom window. Your breath would form white clouds in the dark room. To survive this, your mother would prepare a heavy metal or rubber hot water bottle, wrapping it tightly in a flannel cloth. You would dive under the heavy, scratchy woolen blankets and press your cold feet against that glorious source of heat. You learned to lie perfectly still, creating a tiny cocoon of warmth in a freezing room. That sharp contrast between the biting cold air and the heavy warmth of the blankets is a physical memory we will never forget. Let us talk about the weather and transportation. The Netherlands is famous for its rain and its fierce headwinds. But the rule for school children was completely uncompromising. You biked to school, no matter what the sky was doing. If a torrential downpour started just as you were leaving the house, there was no question of being driven in a warm car. You were handed a stiff, brightly colored rain suit that trapped all your body heat and made an incredibly loud rustling noise with every pedal stroke. You fought against the relentless wind, your face stinging with cold raindrops, gripping the handlebars with wet woolen gloves. It was character building in the truest sense of the phrase. When you finally arrived at school, the hallway smelled strongly of wet wool and damp canvas. We learned early on that a little bit of rain would not melt us, a lesson in resilience that stayed with us for a lifetime. The morning hygiene routine had another rule that modern children would find quite shocking. Since the bathroom, if you even had one, was freezing, most daily washing was done at the small sink in your bedroom or the kitchen. The rule was the daily washcloth routine. Every single morning, your mother would hand you a damp, cold, rough washcloth. You were expected to scrub your face, your neck, and behind your ears until the skin was pink and glowing. There was no warm running water up there, just the shockingly cold tap water that completely woke you up. You would stand there shivering in your undershirt, vigorously rubbing the sleep from your eyes. It was a Spartan way to start the morning, but it instilled a deep sense of discipline and cleanliness. That rough texture of the terry cloth and the smell of the simple bar soap are deeply etched into our collective memory. Weekends brought a sudden change in wardrobe and a whole new set of rules. We all had our everyday play clothes, which were often patched at the knees, and then we had our Sunday best. Sunday clothes were a serious matter. They were stiff, they were uncomfortable, and they were kept pristine. The rule was that once you were dressed for a Sunday visit to your grandparents or for church, you were absolutely not allowed to play outside, sit on the grass, or engage in any activity that might result in a stain. You had to sit up straight on the velvet sofa, keeping your shiny leather shoes perfectly still. The color of your shirt might itch terribly, but you endured it quietly. These clothes represented respect for the day and for the people you were visiting. It taught us that certain occasions demanded a physical manifestation of effort and respect. There was a very specific household chore that fell to the children, and it was treated with the utmost seriousness. The rule of saving points from the coffee packages. When a package of the famous Dutch coffee brand was empty, it was never simply thrown away. Your mother would carefully cut out the red seal with the points on it. Your job was to take a small sponge, dampen it, and meticulously stick these small paper squares into a special savings booklet. You had to paste them perfectly straight. When the booklet was finally full, it was like holding a small fortune. You would go with your mother to the special store to exchange these booklets for beautiful coffee cups, a new teapot, or shiny spoons. It was a masterclass in patience and collective family effort. We learned that small, consistent actions over a long period could result in something beautiful and valuable for the home. Perhaps the most culturally defining rule of our childhood was a phrase every Dutch child heard 1,000 times. Just act normal, then you are already acting crazy enough. This was the golden rule of social behavior in the 1970s. You were taught never to brag, never to be overly loud in public, and never to think you were better than anyone else. If you got a new bicycle, you were happy, but you did not show it off to the neighborhood. If you got an excellent grade at school, you were quietly proud. Standing out from the crowd was frowned upon. This rule created a society of modesty and equality. It kept us grounded and taught us to value humility over arrogance. While it might have held back a bit of individual expression, it wove a tight, solid fabric of community where everyone belonged because nobody was trying to rise above the rest. Along with acting normal came the intriguing rule of the living room windows. In our streets, the large front windows were always immaculately clean, and during the day, the curtains were thrown wide open. The home was on display for the world to see, showcasing neatness and order. But the strict unwritten rule was that as a passerby, you never stopped to stare inside. You might give a quick polite glance and a nod if someone was sitting by the window, but lingering was considered extremely rude. We were taught to respect privacy even when everything was completely visible. It was a fascinating paradox of our culture. We wanted to show our neighbors that we had nothing to hide, but we also trusted our neighbors to respect our intimate family space. It was a beautiful dance of trust and boundary keeping that defined our neighborhoods. Inside the kitchen, waste was considered a near tragedy. This brings us to the rule of the bottle scraper. When a long glass bottle of vanilla custard or thick yogurt was nearly empty, you did not dare throw it in the trash. The rule was that every single drop of food had to be consumed. You would take the special rubber scraper with a long metal handle and meticulously work it down the inside of the glass bottle. You would scrape the thick, sweet custard from the bottom and sides, pulling it up with immense concentration. The sound of the rubber squeaking against the glass is something we all remember. It was more than just saving a penny. It was a deep-rooted respect for the food we had. Our parents had lived through harder times, and they passed that profound gratitude down to us through these small, everyday kitchen rituals. Let us take a moment to remember the morning symphony of our streets. The milkman was a regular feature of our daily lives. Standing at the front door, waiting for him, came with its own set of duties. You had to place the empty, rinsed glass bottles exactly on the step, alongside a small note or special tokens indicating what your mother needed that day. When the milkman arrived in his slow, humming electric cart, you would carefully carry the heavy, cold glass bottles of full cream milk back into the kitchen. The strict rule here was about the colored aluminum caps. You were not allowed to just tear them off and throw them away. You had to peel them off carefully, wash them, and save them for school craft projects or local charity collections. Every piece of packaging had a second life. The clinking of those glass bottles was the reassuring sound of a neighborhood waking up. School days had their own strict, messy rules, particularly when it came to writing. We did not start with easy plastic ballpoint pens. We had to learn to write beautifully using a wooden pen holder and a metal nib dipped in real ink. The rule was, perfect penmanship, but the reality was often a disaster of blue stains. You had to hold your hand at a very specific angle to avoid smudging the wet ink across the page. Your fingers would inevitably be stained dark blue by the end of the week. In your wooden desk was a small glass inkwell, and you used thick, fibrous blotting paper to carefully dry your written words. The slow, deliberate scratching sound of 30 metal nibs moving across paper in a quiet classroom is a memory that remains perfectly preserved in my mind. It taught us precision, focus, and the understanding that good things take careful time. When visitors came over for coffee, a highly orchestrated ritual took place, governed by the famous cookie tin rule. Your mother would bring out a beautiful, painted tin box filled with an assortment of biscuits. The tin would be opened, and the wonderful smell of baked sugar and butter would fill the room. The tin was passed around, and the absolute rule was that you took exactly one cookie, not two, and you certainly did not dig around, looking for the one with the most chocolate. You took the one closest to you, said thank you politely, and placed it on your saucer. The moment everyone had their single cookie, the lid of the tin was firmly pressed shut and placed back in the cupboard. It was a lesson in moderation and manners. It made that one cookie taste like an absolute feast, a small treasure to be nibbled on slowly while listening to the adults talk. Clothing in the 1970s was mended, not discarded. The rule of the wooden mushroom is one every mother knew well. When you wore a hole in the heel of your thick woolen socks, they were not thrown in the bin. In the evening, sitting under the warm light of the reading lamp, your mother would stretch the sock over a smooth, wooden darning mushroom. With a long needle and a thick thread of matching yarn, she would meticulously weave a new patch of fabric right over the hole. As children, we were taught to respect our clothes. You wore hand-me-downs from your older brothers or sisters without complaining. The hems of trousers were taken out to let them grow with you. Seeing your mother quietly mending clothes by the heater was a silent testament to her care and the resourceful spirit of the time. Nothing was wasted, everything was valued. Riding on the back of your mother or father's bicycle was an adventure with very strict safety protocols. Long before padded child seats and safety helmets, you sat directly on the hard metal luggage carrier. The rule was that you had to sit perfectly still, holding tightly onto your parents' heavy winter coat. Your little legs dangled precariously close to the spinning spokes of the back wheel. You were constantly reminded to keep your feet angled outwards. If you wiggled too much, the balance of the whole bicycle would shift and you would hear a sharp warning over your parents' shoulder. You felt the bumps of the brick roads travel right up your spine, but leaning against your mother's warm back while watching the Dutch landscape roll by gave you an incredible sense of security. It was built on trust, balance, and following instructions. The highlight of the entire week was undoubtedly the Saturday evening television ritual. After a week of discipline, early bedtimes, and healthy food, Saturday night was a glorious exception. The rule was that after a thorough washing, you could put on your fresh pajamas and come downstairs to the living room. The heavy curtains were closed against the dark night, keeping the warmth inside. On the coffee table, your mother would place a few small bowls of paprika potato chips and perhaps pour you a glass of fizzy lemonade. The whole family would sit together, shoulder to shoulder on the sofa, to watch a grand entertainment show or a family quiz. This was our quality time. Nobody was distracted, nobody was looking away. We laughed together at the same jokes. The taste of those paprika chips and the cozy warmth of the gas heater represent the absolute peak of childhood happiness. And finally, we arrive at the most profound rule of all, the rule that held our entire society together, the absolute respect for the elderly and for authority. You were taught to always stand up on the bus if an older person boarded. You never addressed a neighbor or a teacher by their first name, always using the formal pronoun and their title. If an adult was speaking, you stayed silent and listened. This was not about fear, it was about an ingrained sense of social harmony. We understood that those who had lived longer deserved our care and our quiet respect. This rule knit our neighborhoods tightly together. The elderly felt seen and protected by the younger generation. It created a world where you felt a responsibility not just to your own family, but to everyone around you. It was a beautiful, invisible web of mutual respect that I fear we are slowly losing today. When we look back at all these old rules, these forgotten rituals, and the strict boundaries of our childhood, we realize something incredibly important. We are not merely feeling nostalgic for the old objects, the rough washcloths, or the freezing bedrooms. What our hearts truly ache for is the way time felt back then. We miss the slow rhythm of the days, the clear expectations, and most of all, the deep, unbroken connection we shared with our families and our neighbors. Those absurd rules were actually the framework of a deeply loving and safe childhood. They shaped us into who we are today. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like, so we can continue to preserve these beautiful memories together. Now, I would love to hear from you. Which strict rule did your parents enforce in the 1970s that you actually miss in today's modern world? Please leave your story in the comments below and let us remember the good old days together.